The church bell had stopped ringing before she understood he was not coming. Eleanor Hart stood at the altar rail with rainwater dripping from the hem of her dress and the marriage paper damp in her gloved hand. Candles guttered in the draught. Wet wool, old pine, and wax thickened the air. The pastor would not meet her eyes, neither would the dozen townspeople who had stayed only long enough to witness disgrace. Outside, wagon wheels hissed through mud and rolled on toward warmer homes. No one said the words aloud. They did not need to. Her groom had not come. She had crossed half the country on a promise printed in a newspaper advertisement and sealed by letters written in a strong, practical hand. Respectable ranch, need for a wife, partnership, stability, a future for a widow with no brothers willing to keep feeding her and no family fortune left to soften the world. She had packed 2 dresses, 1 good pair of boots, her late husband's pocket watch, and the habit of enduring what could not be changed. Now she held a useless certificate while strangers pitied her in silence. Bootsteps sounded on the church steps, heavy, certain. The door opened and a gust of cold rain blew in around a broad-shouldered man in a dark coat. Water ran from the brim of his hat. He took in the flowers, the empty pews, the paper in her hand, and finally her face. His own revealed little. "Pastor gone?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded once. "Then you're Miss Hart. I was meant to be Mrs. Reed." "No." The word was plain and hard, yet there was no mockery in it, only fact. Facts were cleaner than pity. "You know him?" she asked. "I know his debts." She straightened. "If you've come to laugh, sir, you'll have to stand behind the others." Something moved at the corner of his mouth and vanished before becoming a smile. Caleb Mercer. She knew the name. Anyone with ears in the territory knew it. Mercer Ridge Ranch. Good grazing land clawed back from ruin by a man who trusted fences more than people. A man said to be cold as January iron. A man whose fiancé had died 3 winters ago on an icy road. Gossip traveled faster than trains. The rain beat harder on the roof. "You got a room?" he asked. The boarding house gave it away when the ceremony ran long. He glanced toward the storm. "Come on." "To where?" "I'll walk you home. I have none. Then we'll begin with a roof." He turned as if obedience were natural. She almost refused on principle. Then the wind blew rain through the doorway, and she followed him into the dark. Mud clung to her shoes. The street lamps burned weak behind the curtains of the weather. Caleb took a lantern from the church hook and held it low so she could see the ruts. He did not touch her when she slipped once. He only moved closer, blocking the worst of the wind with his body. Faces shifted behind windows. She kept her gaze on the road. "Is Amos Reed dead?" she asked. "No." "Hurt?" "No." "Then absent by choice." "Likely." They climbed the north rise of town and stopped at a small weathered cottage with rosemary pots on the porch and warm light in the front room. Caleb knocked once. A silver-haired woman opened the door, looked at Eleanor's soaked dress, then at Caleb's expressionless face. "Bring her in before she freezes," she said. Heat wrapped around Eleanor like hands, wood smoke, bread, soap. She had not known comfort could ache. "This is Mrs. Doyle," Caleb said. "I know who I am," the older woman replied. "You, take off that wet coat and stop dripping on my floor. You, child, by the stove." Eleanor sat because her knees had begun to shake. Mrs. Doyle placed a mug of hot tea in her hands and towels in her lap. Caleb remained by the door, hat lowered, as if uncertain whether he belonged in any room that held warmth. "You owe me nothing," Eleanor said. His gaze met hers. "Good." Then he left. "Mrs." Doyle watched the closed door and snorted softly. "That man has the manners of a fence post, but he does right." "Why?" "Because he knows what it is to stand alone while folks stare." Eleanor slept in a narrow bed beneath patched quilts while rain tapped the roof. Shame woke with her before dawn, sharp as hunger. She dressed in her plain gray gown and found Mrs. Doyle kneading bread. "I need work," Eleanor said. "There is plenty. Little of it pays. I can keep books, read contracts, teach sums, mend, cook if no one values flavor." Mrs. Doyle laughed. "Then you are richer than most men in this county." By noon, Eleanor had learned 3 things. Amos Reed had ridden south to gamble 3 days before the wedding. He had lost heavily. and the town had already decided she was either foolish or desperate for answering his advertisement. By evening, she learned a fourth. Caleb Mercer needed help. She found him in the mercantile lifting feed sacks onto a wagon. The store smelled of leather, coffee beans, and damp canvas. Men pretending not to listen became very busy near the barrels when she approached. "I hear you need a bookkeeper," she said. He hoisted another sack. "I need rain, then calves that live. Books come after. I can be hired cheaper than rain." That almost smile again. Almost. "I don't hire charity, then hire competence." He set the sack down and looked at her fully. Gray eyes, tired eyes, the sort that had measured losses in silence. "You know ranch ledgers? I know numbers. They misbehaved the same everywhere." A muffled laugh came from the back. Caleb ignored it. He spread a grease-marked ledger across the counter. Columns wandered, totals contradicted themselves, notes crowded margins in 3 hands. "Tell me what's wrong." She reached for the pencil. "You are being cheated by someone who cannot spell." A cough hid another laugh. She turned pages, recalculated entries, circled missing cattle payments, marked feed purchases counted twice. "You sold 12 heads to the Hanley brothers and recorded payment for 10. Your foreman rounded wages in his own favor, and if this seed order is honest, your supplier is a saint or a liar." The merchant barked a laugh before swallowing it. Caleb studied the page, then her face. "How long to fix it?" 3 days for the books, longer for your habits." This time even the merchant failed to hide his grin. "Wages?" Caleb asked. "Room, board, and enough cash that I may choose my next life when this one improves." "You bargain hard." "I bargain accurately." The store went still. "Come at dawn," he said. She extended her hand before caution could stop her. Surprise flickered over his face. Then his calloused palm closed around hers, brief and warm. "Miss Hart. Mr. Mercer." When she stepped back, every eye in the store rested on her. Let them look. She carried something stronger than humiliation now. That night Mrs. Doyle listened without interrupting. "He will work you hard," she said at last. "I prefer work to pity." Mrs. Doyle slid bread into the oven. "Then perhaps you have found the proper man after all." Eleanor should have dismissed the idea. Instead, she lay awake listening to the wind ease after rain and wondering why the memory of Caleb saying her name would not leave her. Dawn came white with frost and the smell of coal smoke drifting through town. Eleanor reached Mercer Ridge with numb fingers, mud drying on her boots, and a determination sharpened by cold. The ranch rose from the plains like a stubborn fact, weathered house, broad barn, corrals silvered with ice, and pasture stretching into distance under a hard, pale sky. Nothing about it invited softness. Even the wind seemed employed there. Caleb was already in the yard repairing a broken gate hinge. He wore no coat despite the cold. His sleeves were rolled to the forearms, skin reddened by morning air. He glanced once at the sky, once at her, and handed her a ring of keys, kitchen, ledgers on the table. No greeting, no wasted syllables. She accepted the keys. "Good morning to you as well." He drove another nail. Morning. Inside, the ranch house held the stale chill of rooms heated only where necessary. The kitchen was large, practical, and worn by years of use. Iron stove, scrub table scarred by knives, shelves half-stocked with flour, beans, coffee, and little else, dust in the corners, a sink bucket frozen thin at the top. The ledgers sat in a stack thick enough to suggest either prosperity or neglect. She opened the first book and discovered the answer was neglect. Columns stopped mid-month, receipts tucked loose between pages, wages noted in pencil, then altered. Sales entered with no dates, feed tallies that belonged in another season entirely. It was less a bookkeeping system than a cry for help. She built the fire herself, boiled water, and began. Hours passed under the scratch of pencil and the crack of thawing wood in the stove. Men came and went through the back door for coffee, each slowing a fraction when they saw a strange woman at the table with the ranch books open before her. The oldest among them finally removed his hat. "Ma'am, sir." He hesitated. "You know what those numbers mean? I know what this ranch has been overpaying for oats since June." The man barked a laugh. "Then you'll do." He introduced himself as Tom Barlow, foreman by title and peacemaker by habit, if the lines in his face meant anything. He was broad in the middle, gray in the beard, and carried the watchful patience of men who had raised sons or survived fools. Caleb didn't explain much, Tom said, pouring coffee. So I'll save us time. Hands are paid Fridays. The south fence needs mending. One mare's lame. And if you can make sense of those books, I'll name a calf after you. I ask only wages, Mr. Barlow. Tom. By noon, she had reorganized 3 months of accounts and identified enough waste to buy winter feed twice over. She also learned that no one in the house had cooked a proper midday meal in some time. Bread heel, salt pork gone hard, coffee strong enough to strip paint, so she made stew, not because anyone asked, because 6 working men should not be fed like bachelors under punishment. When Caleb came in, cold air following him, he stopped at the doorway. Steam lifted from the pot. Onion, beef, and bay leaf warmed the room. You hired a bookkeeper, she said without looking up. The stew is incidental. He set his gloves on the counter. Didn't ask for either. Then fortune has exceeded your expectations. Tom laughed into his cup. One of the younger hands nearly choked. Caleb's gaze moved over the room, measuring the ease there, then landed on the ledgers stacked in neat order. You touch those? I rescued them. He crossed to the table. She showed him a page of clean columns, balanced totals, and a list of unpaid invoices with dates attached. You've been shorted by Pike Mercantile 3 times, she said. Likely through carelessness, though I leave room for greed. Your men are owed $2 in corrected wages. And unless you enjoy donating cattle, stop selling to the Hanley brothers without witnesses. His jaw tightened. You're certain? I do not guess with numbers. He read in silence. Something in his posture changed, not softened, but reoriented. Respect did not come warmly from a man like Caleb Mercer. It came like a gate unlatched one hinge at a time. Eat before it cools, she said. He looked at her then, direct and unreadable. Yes, ma'am. The younger hands stared as if they had witnessed lightning strike indoors. 3 days passed. The phrase became a rhythm of its own. 3 days of frost mornings and smoky evenings, 3 days of ledgers mended, inventories counted, and flour sacks labeled. 3 days of Eleanor discovering that ranch labor had a cadence no city household ever knew. Dawn chores, noon repairs, dusk checks, night storms watched from porches with narrowed eyes. She proved useful in ways no one expected. When the lame mare refused feed, she cleaned the hoof, found a stone lodged deep, and drew it free while the animal kicked hard enough to bruise her shoulder. When a supplier delivered worm-eaten grain, she refused the load, cited the signed order, and sent him back cursing. When Tom misplaced the branding records, she produced them from beneath a stack of seed catalogs where he himself had set them. Each small act shifted the air around her. The men began asking before assuming. They moved aside when she entered the pantry. They stopped calling her ma'am with amusement and started saying it with habit. Caleb said little. Yet he noticed everything. He noticed she rose before the others to warm the kitchen. He noticed she mended a torn coat left on a chair without announcing it. He noticed she carried water buckets though her hands reddened from the cold. He noticed, and never thanked her in words. Instead, he fixed the loose latch on her room door. He sharpened the kitchen knives. He left a new pair of lined gloves on the table without explanation. I can pay for these, she said when she found him in the yard. No, I dislike debts. So do I. She held the gloves. Then what is this? He adjusted a saddle strap without looking at her. Practicality. It was not gratitude. It was something rarer from him. Attention. That evening, the first trouble came. She accompanied Tom into town to settle corrected wages with Pike Mercantile. The store was crowded, warm with bodies and gossip. Flour dust hung in the light. Conversations dipped when she entered. Mr. Pike smiled too quickly. Mrs. Reed, Miss Hart, she said. Of course. A mistake. One of several, I expect. Tom coughed into his beard to hide amusement. She laid the invoice pages on the counter and listed discrepancies one by one. Short waits, duplicate charges, missing credits. Pike's smile thinned with each figure. You accuse me of dishonesty? I accuse you of arithmetic. A woman near the lamp snorted aloud. Pike leaned closer. A lady would leave trade to men. Eleanor felt every eye turned toward her. Before she could answer, the store door opened. Cold wind entered with Caleb Mercer, mud on his boots, hat low, expression flat. He crossed the room without haste. Silence moved ahead of him like the weather. "Problem?" he asked. Pike straightened. "Private business." Caleb looked at the invoices, then at Eleanor. "No." One word. Same as the church. Fact, not fury. He placed coins on the counter for the corrected balance she had calculated. Then he took back twice that amount in goods already owed. "You'll weigh fair next time," Caleb said. Pike flushed. "You threatening me?" "No." Again that plain hard fact. He turned to the room at large. "Miss Hart speaks for this ranch on accounts. Any man doubts it can bring his books to her and be embarrassed publicly." Laughter broke sharp and sudden. Pike reddened to the ears. Eleanor stared at Caleb. He had defended her without flourish. Without even seeming to understand, he had done something intimate in its own way. Outside, dusk gathered blue along the street. They walked toward the wagon in brittle cold. "You did not need to come," she said. "I was in town. To buy nails?" He held up an empty sack. She looked at it, then at him. He almost smiled. Almost. Back at the ranch, she stood alone in the kitchen after supper, hands braced on the table. The room smelled of bread and cedar smoke. She had been humiliated in public once and defended in public once, all within the span of a week. Strange how quickly a life could alter its shape. The back door opened. Caleb stepped in, carrying snow on his shoulders. "Storm coming," he said. "I can see the clouds." He set a lantern on the table. "Stay near the house tomorrow. I do not take orders well. They aren't for your comfort, and if I ignore them..." His gaze met hers. "Then I'll come find you." The words were practical. The effect was not. He turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. Eleanor. The first time he had used her given name, she felt it like heat. "Yes?" "Lock your window tonight. The north latch is loose. I'll fix it in spring." Then he was gone. She stood very still while wind pressed at the walls and the storm gathered somewhere beyond the dark fields. By morning the plains had vanished. Snow drove sideways across Mercer Ridge in long white sheets that erased fences, swallowed the road, and turned the barn 20 yards away into a shifting shadow. The house groaned under the wind. Frost feathered the inside edges of the kitchen windows, despite the iron stove burning hot enough to redden its seams. Eleanor tied on an apron, fed wood into the fire, and pretended the warning Caleb had given her meant nothing at all. Stay near the house. Men issued commands easily when they believed the weather answered to them. Yet she understood the difference between pride and caution. She kept to the kitchen through breakfast, filling bowls, refilling cups, listening as the ranch hands spoke in clipped practical phrases about drifts, stock water, and whether the south shed roof would hold. Caleb ate standing. He always did when the weather turned bad, as if chairs were indulgences reserved for calmer seasons. "Tom, east pasture first," he said. "Jesse with you. Ben, check the pump line." His eyes flicked to Eleanor. "You stay inside." She lifted a brow. "You repeat yourself often when anxious?" The younger hands froze over their spoons. Caleb buttoned his coat. "I repeat myself when ignored." Then he stepped into the storm. The door slammed. Snow hissed across the threshold before she forced it shut. Tom grinned into his coffee. "You enjoy poking bears, Miss Hart?" "I enjoy reminding men they are not mountains." Careful, that one might believe it. When the others left, the house became a vessel of creaks and wind. Eleanor used the quiet to tackle the pantry inventory, then the household accounts, then the stack of unanswered letters she had found tied with twine in a drawer. Bills, supplier notices, a tax reminder stamped twice, one letter from a bank in Denver concerning a mortgage due before spring thaw. That she read twice. Mercer Ridge was profitable land badly managed on paper, but profitable did not mean liquid, and banks cared little for cattle not yet sold. She set the letter aside just as the barn door outside banged hard enough to shake the wall. Instinct moved her before caution could object. She wrapped a shawl over her coat, pulled on the lined gloves Caleb had given her, and stepped into the storm. Cold struck like a slap. Snow found every seam in her clothing at once. The yard was knee-deep in drifts where an hour earlier there had been mud. She bent into the wind and fought her way to the barn. Inside was dim warmth, hay dust, horse breath, and the frantic sound of hooves striking wood. A young gelding had tangled himself in a fallen rope and panicked. Each kick tightened the loop around one hind leg. Blood darkened the hair above the fetlock. "Easy," she murmured, though fear made nonsense of language in beasts and men alike. She moved slow, low, keeping out of range. Twice the horse lunged. Once a hoof grazed her sleeve hard enough to numb her arm. She waited until terror spent itself into trembling, then cut the rope free with the pocket knife she kept in her skirt. The horse nearly collapsed. She checked the leg, found no break, packed snow around the swelling, and led him to an empty stall just as the barn door crashed open. Caleb entered in a gust of white. For one suspended instant, he took in the scene, Eleanor half covered in snow, rope at her feet, blood on her glove, the gelding lathered and shaking. "What did I say?" he asked, voice dangerously calm. "Several things." "Be more specific." "I said stay inside, and I found your horse strangling himself while you were elsewhere." He strode across the aisle. Up close, snow clung to his lashes. His jaw was set hard enough to crack stone. "You could have been kicked. I was nearly bored to death first." He looked at the swelling on the gelding's leg, then at the cut rope, then back to her face. Anger warred with something less simple. Finally, he took her wrist and turned the glove over. "Blood, but not much. You're hurt. The horse is hurt." His thumb brushed the torn seam where her skin beneath had reddened. A small touch. Practical. Yet neither of them moved. The barn seemed suddenly full of their breathing. Then he released her and stepped back. "Go to the house. You're welcome." His mouth tightened. "Go." She went because the pulse in her throat had become unreasonable. That evening the storm worsened. Tom and the others returned after dark with ice in their beards, and news that 2 steers were down in the north draw. The drifts were too deep to reach them before morning. Caleb said little, but the silence around him changed shape. Responsibility sat on him like another coat. After supper, Eleanor spread the mortgage letter on the table. "You owe Denver National within 6 weeks," she said. Tom found the stove suddenly fascinating and left the room. Caleb removed his gloves, finger by finger. "I know what I owe. Do you know your current liquid cash?" "Enough. That's not a number. It'll be paid." "With what? Pride?" His gaze snapped to hers. She pressed on. "You have cattle, land, and receivables tied up in men who pay late. You have waste reduced only this week. You have deferred repairs. And unless you plan to shear coins from sheep you do not own, you need a strategy." The kitchen went still, except for wind at the windows. He spoke softly, which made it more dangerous. "You think because you balance books, you know this ranch. I think because I balance books, I know trouble when I see it." He leaned both hands on the table between them. "This land buried my father in debt. It buried my mother in work. I dragged it clear one season at a time. Don't mistake paper for the whole weight of a thing." The words landed heavy with more than anger. There it was at last, the inherited failure he carried like scar tissue. She answered just as quietly. "And do not mistake silence for strength. If you drown alone when help stands in your kitchen, that is vanity, not honor." His eyes held hers, neither moved. Then he straightened, took the mortgage letter, folded it once, and put it in his pocket. "We leave before dawn for town." She blinked. "We? You wanted numbers. You'll help make them." The next morning the storm had broken into bitter blue cold. Snow glittered cruel and beautiful across the plains. Caleb hitched the wagon while Eleanor bundled ledgers, invoices, and a list of buyers likely to pay cash for early contracted spring calves. They rode in silence at first, wheels crunching frozen ruts. The road to town cut through open land where wind had carved drifts into waves. At last, Caleb spoke without looking at her. "My father signed bad notes to keep appearances." She waited. He'd host suppers when feed bins were empty, bought a piano while fences fell down, called it optimism. "And your mother?" "Worked until she coughed blood, died before the piano needed tuning." The starkness of it hollowed the air. He flicked the reins once. "I don't ask for help because men offering it usually wanted something tied to the favor." She studied his profile, the hard line of a man built around refusals. "I asked for wages," she said. "You ask for truth more often. That costs less than pride." This time the smile came closer than before. "Not enough to be named, enough to be seen." The town bustled with storm business when they arrived. Shovels, harness repairs, men boasting over whether survived. Caleb took her first to the bank, where the manager's welcome cooled visibly at the sight of ledger books under a woman's arm. "We can extend it by 8%, the banker said. "Given the circumstances." "Given your greed," Eleanor replied. Caleb said nothing. He merely placed the books before her and stepped aside. For the next hour, she dismantled the man's proposal with dates, market rates, collateral values, and projected spring receipts. By the end, the extension stood at 5% with delayed principal and a written clause preventing sudden call-in. The banker signed with a jaw like iron. Outside, Caleb tucked the papers into his coat. "You enjoy bloodshed," he said. "I enjoy accuracy." They stopped next at Pike Mercantile to collect overdue credits, then at the stock office to secure advance contracts. By afternoon, they had done enough business to save the ranch through summer if weather held. As they crossed the street, a voice called from the boardwalk, "Mrs. Reed!" Amos Reed himself descended from the saloon porch in a fine coat bought on borrowed money, handsome in the shallow way of polished boots. He spread his arms as if late arrival were a charm. "There you are." Eleanor felt disgust settle cold and clean. Caleb's body went still beside her. Amos smiled broadly. "Unfortunate misunderstanding at the church?" "I was delayed." "For 3 days?" Eleanor asked. "Cards ran long. You know how men are." "No," she said, "but I know what cowards are." His smile thinned. "Careful. You came here for a husband and found evidence against the species." A few men nearby laughed. Amos looked to Caleb. "Mercer. Keeping my bride warm for me?" The street quieted. Caleb took one step forward. Eleanor touched his sleeve first. It was the first time she had ever laid claim to stopping him. Amos saw it. So did everyone else, and whatever game he had expected to play changed in his eyes. Amos Reed recovered quickly. Men like him often did. They mistook shamelessness for resilience and charm for immunity. He tipped his hat toward Eleanor as if the street were a ballroom instead of frozen mud and watching faces. "You always were spirited in your letters," he said. "That can be useful in a wife. I was never your wife." "A technicality." "No," Caleb said. One word again. Flat. Certain. Amos glanced at him with irritation, sharpened by caution. Caleb Mercer was not a man most chose to test publicly. Yet, vanity makes fools brave. "You aim to court her now?" Amos asked, "after taking what's mine?" The silence that followed carried weight enough to bend timber. Eleanor stepped forward before Caleb could answer. "I was never property," she said. "Not yours. Not any man's." A murmur moved through the gathered crowd. Women on the boardwalk straightened. Pike himself paused in his doorway with a crate in his hands. Amos laughed too loudly. "You came west by advertisement. That's a purchase dressed in lace." "No," she said, voice calm as cut glass. "That was employment I nearly mistook for salvation." His smile slipped. "You think folks will side with you?" he asked. "A widow with no family, no land, no name worth protecting." At that, old Mrs. Doyle, who had emerged from the bakery carrying wrapped loaves, spoke from the edge of the crowd. "Her name's worth more than yours, Amos Reed, and it always was." Several heads turned. Then Tom Barlow, broad as a gatepost, came down from the feed store porch. "Mercer Ridge trades with her signature now," he said. "That's enough for me." The shift in the street was subtle and total. Social judgment has no spine of its own. It leans where strength gathers. Amos saw it too. He gave Eleanor one last polished smile, thin as paper. "This town tires of novelties. When it does, you'll remember I offered security. You offered absence in a decent coat." Laughter broke openly this time. Amos's face hardened. He stepped close enough that whiskey reached her on his breath. "You'll regret making sport of me." Caleb moved then, not fast, not dramatic. He simply placed himself between them until Amos had no view of her at all. "Go home," Caleb said. Amos held his stare a long second, calculating cost. Then he spat into the street and turned away. The crowd exhaled. No one cheered. This was not theater. It was hierarchy corrected in public. Eleanor became aware that her hand still gripped Caleb's sleeve. She let go at once. He did not look back at her when he spoke. Wagon. They loaded purchases in silence. The ride home began under a sky whitening toward fresh snow. For several miles only the harness jingled and wheels struck frozen ruts. At last, Caleb said, "You shouldn't have touched my arm," she turned sharply. "To stop you from breaking his jaw, to claim the right." Heat rose in her face despite the cold. "I claimed nothing." He kept his eyes on the road. The whole street thought otherwise. "And what did you think?" His jaw flexed once. "I think gossip wastes daylight." It was not an answer, which meant it was. Back at the ranch, work swallowed the afternoon. Feed stored, contracts filed, stove banked, men grateful for wages paid in full. Yet something in the house had altered. She felt it in every room. Awareness now lived there beside them, unwelcome and impossible to dismiss. That evening she found a parcel outside her door. Inside lay a new pair of sturdy boots, women's size, better leather than her own cracked pair could ever claim. No note, she carried them to the kitchen where Caleb sat, repairing a bridle by lamplight. "You purchase practical gifts often for employees?" she asked. He did not glance up. "Your souls were splitting." "I did not ask." "You needed them." "I can buy my own." "Then pay me from wages." She set the boots on the table. "That's not the point." He looked up then, gray eyes steady. "I know." The room held the smell of oil, leather, and rising bread dough. Firelight moved over the planes of his face, softening nothing and making everything harder to ignore. She lowered herself into the chair opposite him. "What is the point, then?" He threaded the bridle strap through its buckle before answering. "I don't know how to do small things properly." The honesty of it struck deeper than any practiced tenderness could have. She touched the boot leather with one finger. "You walked me through the rain. You fixed my door latch. You bought boots after noticing what I had not said aloud. You seem capable enough." His mouth moved almost into a smile. "Those are tasks. Sometimes tasks are all people can offer." His gaze lifted to hers and stayed there longer than custom allowed. The back door burst open before either could move. Jessie, one of the younger hands, stumbled in, red-faced and breathless. "The north fence is cut," he said. 3 heads missing." Caleb was on his feet at once. "How long?" "Couldn't say." Snows started covering tracks. Tom appeared behind Jessie, already shrugging into his coat. Could be thieves, could be Hanley boys, could be Reed trying to prove he still breathes. Caleb reached for his rifle by the door. Eleanor stood. "You'll never track them blind in snowfall." "We'll try." She crossed to the table, snatched the county map she had been using for tax boundaries, and spread it flat. If cattle were driven, they'll avoid open ridge in this wind. Too exposed. They'll use creek bed cover, then cut east toward the abandoned quarry road. Tom leaned over the map. "She's right." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "How do you know?" "Because men stealing cattle are lazy before they are clever." Tom barked a laugh. "Marry me instead, Mercer." No one smiled except perhaps Eleanor for half a heartbeat. She pointed again. "If you take the north draw, you'll miss them. Circle wide through cottonwoods and meet the creek crossing here." Caleb studied the map, then her face. "You coming?" She blinked. "In this weather? You want to be obeyed? Come prove it." Tom muttered something appreciative under his breath. 20 minutes later, she rode wrapped in 2 coats on the surest mare in the barn, snow needling her cheeks while the men fanned across the dark land. Fear lived under her ribs, sharp and bright. So did exhilaration. They found the tracks exactly where she predicted. 3 cattle, 2 horses, 1 dragging gait from a lame shoe. Hanley brothers. The chase through the cottonwoods was all noise and shadow. Branches whipping, hooves striking hidden stone, men shouting in bursts swallowed by wind. When they reached the creek crossing, the thieves were there, trying to force the cattle over thin ice. Caleb rode ahead. "Leave 'em." One Hanley wheeled, pistol half drawn. Tom fired first into the air. Horses reared, cattle bawled. The younger Hanley lost his seat and plunged into the freezing shallows with a curse. Chaos became an advantage. Eleanor drove her mare wide, cutting behind the herd just as they began to bolt. She had no rope, no rifle, only sense. She shouted, flapped her coat, and turned the lead steer back from open dark toward the bank. The others followed. By the time she reined in, lungs burning, Caleb had both brothers disarmed and face down in snow. He looked at her across the churned white ground. Not surprised now. Recognition. Back at the ranch after midnight, the sheriff took the Hanleys away, cursing. The house filled with thawing men, wet gloves, and loud relief. Tom slapped the table. "Miss Hart saved us $400 in my old knees," Jesse added. "And she rides meaner than Ben." Ben protested from the stove. Caleb said nothing while the others talked. He stood by the sink washing blood from scraped knuckles. When the kitchen finally emptied, only the two of them remained. She moved to bank the fire. He spoke behind her. "Eleanor." The way he said her name had changed again. Lower. Rougher. She turned. He held out her dropped glove, found somewhere in the yard. Their fingers touched when she took it. "You were cold out there," he said. "So were you. I was angry. At thieves, at the thought of not finding you where I left you." The room went very still. He seemed to hear his own words a moment late, then he set the lamp between them like a barrier and walked out into the dark before she could answer. The house woke slowly the next morning, but Eleanor had not slept enough to call it rest. She had lain under quilts listening to the wind ease against the walls and replaying one sentence until dawn thinned the window glass. "At the thought of not finding you where I left you." It was not a declaration. Caleb Mercer did not possess the habits required for declarations. Yet it had entered her chest and remained there, inconvenient and warm. She dressed before sunrise and went to the kitchen, determined to outrun feelings with labor. The room still held traces of last night, mud near the back door, damp gloves drying by the stove, the smell of coffee grounds and wet wool. She mixed biscuit dough harder than necessary. When the oven heated, she attacked the week's supply ledgers. Numbers behaved, numbers asked nothing. By the time Caleb entered, she had balanced 2 accounts and burned 1 tray of biscuits beyond saving. He set a split log beside the stove. Fire was low. So was my patience. His gaze moved to the blackened biscuits. Reckon patience wasn't the only thing. She stared at him. It took her a beat to understand he had made a joke. The shock of it was so great she laughed aloud. He looked almost alarmed by the sound. "You can do that again sometime," she said. "Burn breakfast? Attempt humor." He removed his gloves slowly, as if uncertain whether retreat remained possible. "Don't spread it around." Tom entered then, sniffed the air, and groaned. "Lord preserve us. She's mortal after all." The kitchen filled with men and noise. Work resumed its ordinary tyranny. Yet under every practical exchange ran the memory of the night before, bright as wire. A week into their arrangement, the ranch moved differently because of her. Invoices were paid on time, feed stores were rationed sensibly, wages were recorded correctly, the pantry held labeled jars and a list of what was needed before winter deepened. The men no longer wandered in search of tools because she had organized the shed by use and season. Even Tom admitted with the solemnity of a treaty signing that he could now find nails when he needed nails. Competence, she had learned, was a language everyone understood eventually. Caleb spoke it best. He still rose before dawn, still carried burdens himself before asking another man to help, still answered most questions with half the words available. But he had begun, in small ways, to make room. He moved her chair nearer the stove without comment. He knocked before entering the office room she used for accounts. He asked, once, whether she preferred more sugar ordered with supplies. It was such a minor question she nearly mistrusted it. That afternoon, they rode fence lines together while Tom handled branding records with theatrical misery. The sky was a hard, clean blue. Snowmelt ran under thin ice beside the trail. The plains stretched pale and endless around them. For long stretches, they said nothing. She found she did not mind silence when it came from him. At the west boundary post, Caleb dismounted to reset a leaning rail. She held both horses while he worked, coat off, shirt darkened between the shoulders with effort, hammer ringing against iron, every motion economical. "You stare obvious," he said without looking back. "I observe workmanship. You mock obvious. I refine." He drove the last staple and straightened. Wind lifted a lock of dark hair across his brow. Without thinking, she reached to brush it away. Her hand stopped inches from his face. The old device. Raise the hand. Lower it. She withdrew first. Something unreadable crossed his features. He took the reins from her fingers, their gloves scraping together. "We should head back." The ride home felt shorter and far less simple. Trouble arrived in town 2 days later wearing perfume and widow's weeds. Mrs. Lydia Harrow, owner of the boarding house and collector of all useful gossip, cornered Eleanor in Pike Mercantile while she compared seed prices. "My dear," Lydia said, loud enough for nearby ears, "folk are wondering when Propriety intends to visit Mercer Ridge." Eleanor did not glance up from the seed sacks. "If Propriety pays feed bills, send her out immediately." A few shoppers smiled. Lydia pressed on. "An unmarried woman under a widower's roof. He is not a widower. No matter. A man's house invites conclusions. So does a woman's mouth." The smile vanished from Lydia's face. "You'll find town tolerance short-lived." Eleanor turned then. "Madam, I arrived here publicly abandoned. Since then I have earned wages, improved a business, and committed no offense beyond existing where some dislike to see me. If that strains local nerves, I advise stronger constitutions." The mercantile went silent. Then Caleb's voice came from behind the flour barrels. "Put it on our account, Pike." He emerged carrying harness oil and lamp wicks, expression flat as ever. Yet he had heard enough. Lydia sniffed. "I merely spoke for appearances." Caleb set his goods on the counter. "Don't. One syllable, heavy as a door bar." She drew herself up. "You defend her often." "No," he said. "I correct you often." Pike made a sound, suspiciously like laughter into a crate of beans. Outside, Eleanor walked faster than necessary toward the hitching rail. Caleb caught up beside her. "You needn't answer every fool in town," he said. "I had matters in hand. I know." "Then why intervene?" He loosened the mare's strap. "Because I wanted to." The bluntness of it stole her next reply. They rode home beneath lowering clouds. That night the first real fracture opened between them. She was reviewing supply orders when she found a receipt for lumber dated months earlier and paid in full. No lumber had been delivered. The signature authorizing payment was Caleb's. She carried it to the kitchen where he sharpened a knife. "You were swindled here." He glanced once. "I know. You knew and did nothing." "Was busy." "With what?" "Funding thieves." His jaw hardened. "Drop it." "No." She laid the receipt flat on the table. "This is precisely how decent operations bleed to death, not from catastrophe, from tolerated waste. I said drop it, and I said no." The room tightened around them. He stood, knife set aside. "You think every problem yields because you argue harder. I think pride is expensive. I think you've never built anything men waited to see fail." The word struck. Not because they were cruel, but because some part of them was true. She had survived structures built by others. She had not carried land on her back through drought, yet she answered from the same wounded place, and I think you would rather lose honestly than win with help. They stared at each other across the table, breathing too quickly. Then he took his coat from the peg. "Where are you going?" "Barn. In this cold. Better company." The door slammed behind him. Anger held her upright for several minutes. Then it thinned, leaving only regret and a sharp loneliness she disliked more than either. Mrs. Doyle, who had stayed the night to avoid worsening roads, appeared in the doorway with a basket of mending. "You'll forgive me for hearing everything through walls built by men with small imaginations?" Eleanor pressed fingers to her brow. "I was right, likely, and he was impossible." "Certainly. Then why do I feel miserable?" Mrs. Doyle settled by the stove. "Because being right and being kind are cousins, not twins." Snow began again outside, soft against the windows. After a long minute, Eleanor took a lantern from its hook. Mrs. Doyle hid a smile in her thread. "Where are you bound?" "To better company." The barn was warmer than the yard and colder than the house. Horses shifted in stalls. Hay smelled sweet beneath the sharpness of leather and animal breath. Caleb stood at the far end repairing a harness strap that did not need repair. She approached until the lantern light reached him. "I spoke poorly," she said. He kept working. "You spoke true in parts. I did not come to divide percentages." That brought his eyes up. She stepped closer. "You are allowed to be tired, allowed to have blind spots, allowed to need help without it diminishing what you built." His hands stilled on the strap. "And you," he said after a moment, "are allowed to be wrong sometimes. I dislike that permission." "I know." A horse stamped. Snow whispered on the roof. He set the harness aside. "I paid that lumberman because his wife was dying," he said. He lied about delivery because he was ashamed to ask outright. The heat rushed to her face. Why did you not say so? Because charity spoken aloud turns into debt. She thought of all the hidden acts by which he moved through the world, refusing witness even when witness would spare misunderstanding. I judged you unfairly. You judged what you saw. He took the lantern gently from her hand and hung it on a peg between them. The shadows changed. She should have stepped back then. She did not, neither did he. When he reached for her, it was not grand. One rough hand lifted to the side of her face as if asking a question his mouth could not form. She answered by leaning into the touch. His thumb brushed her cheekbone once, then the barn door banged open hard enough to make them both turn. Jesse stumbled in, breathless and white-faced. Caleb, riders coming up the south road. 3 of them, and one is Amos Reed. The warmth vanished from the barn as if the open door had stolen it whole. Caleb's hand dropped from her face. The place where it had rested burned anyway. How far? He asked. Crossing lower pasture now, Jesse said, bent over and panting. They ain't riding casual. Tom's voice sounded outside, shouting for lanterns. Caleb was moving before the echo died. Coat, rifle, gloves, every motion swift and exact. He looked once at Eleanor. House, locked the door. She lifted her chin. No, his jaw set. This isn't town gossip, and I am not China to be shelved. He took one step closer, lowered his voice, and for the first time she heard fear beneath command. Eleanor. That single use of her name held more urgency than a dozen shouted orders. She understood then that his anger never truly frightened her because it had edges. Fear did not. I'll stay inside, she said, but I won't hide ignorant. A beat passed. He nodded once. They crossed the yard through sharp cold and gathering dark. Lanterns swung from hooks. Ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse and shed, some armed, all grim. Snow crusted beneath boots. Horses snorted steam into the night. From the porch, Eleanor watched 3 riders approach the gate. Amos rode in front on a chestnut gelding too fine for the road. Beside him came a narrow-faced man in a city coat and a deputy sheriff she did not know. Amos smiled before anyone had spoken. He had the look of a man certain that paper made him dangerous. Evening settled hard around the yard. Tom stood at the gate with Caleb beside him. What do you want? Tom called. Amos spread gloved hands. Only lawful business. The narrow-faced man raised a folded document. Elias Porter, acting on behalf of Reed and Company Holdings. We are here to execute claim on assets pledged under unpaid private note. Caleb did not move. No note exists. Amos smiled wider. Depends whose signature one trusts. The deputy shifted uneasily in his saddle. He disliked the task already. Eleanor came off the porch before anyone could stop her. Caleb turned sharply. Inside. She ignored him and crossed the yard until she stood near the gate, skirts catching frost. May I see the document? She asked. Porter blinked at being addressed by a woman and handed it over with visible reluctance. She took the paper to the lantern light. The claim stated that 6 months earlier, Caleb Mercer had borrowed a substantial sum from Amos Reed against future cattle sales, defaulting upon non-payment. In return, Reed held rights to seize 20 heads and associated equipment. At the bottom sat Caleb's signature, or an imitation of it. She looked up slowly. You forged this? Amos laughed, strong accusation from a disappointed bride. Caleb's face had gone still in the dangerous way of deep water. Porter adjusted his collar. If there is a dispute, it can be settled before a magistrate after assets are secured. Convenient, Eleanor said. She lowered her gaze to the page again. Ink pooled differently in the signature than in the body text. The witness line held one name she recognized, Pike Mercantile Clerk. The date was impossible. That had been the week Caleb was snowed in with half the county aware of it. She smiled without warmth. You made 3 mistakes. Amos's confidence flickered. First, Mr. Mercer signs with pressure on the downstroke. This hand trembles. Second, the witness you named was in Cheyenne that week. I saw the freight ledger myself. Third. She held the paper closer to the lantern. This stationery was printed after the new year. The watermark carries the New Year mark from Denver Mill. Tom let out a low whistle. Porter snatched the paper. She stepped back. The deputy leaned from his saddle. Let me see that. She handed it to him instead. He studied the page, then the watermark, then Amos. Is this true? Amos's charm cracked at last. You taking lessons from women now? The deputy's expression hardened. Answer. Caleb still had not spoken. That somehow made the yard more tense. Amos swung down from his horse, boots striking frozen ground. I came for what's owed me. You are owed memory, Eleanor said, specifically of the church door closing behind you. He lunged toward her. Everything happened at once. Caleb moved faster than sight suggested possible. One instant he was beside the gate, the next between them. Amos collided with him and staggered back. Tom seized Porter's reins. Jesse shouted. The deputy jumped down, reaching for Amos's arm. Stand down, the deputy barked. Amos shoved him off. You useless fool. He went for Caleb again with a wild right hand. Caleb took the blow on his shoulder, caught Amos by the coat front, and drove him against the fence hard enough to rattle the rails. No grand fight, no circling fists, just one decisive collision from a stronger man who had no taste for spectacle. Enough, Caleb said. Amos spat blood onto the snow. You think she chose you? He sneered. She chose shelter? The words hung in the cold. Caleb's grip tightened once, then loosened. He let Amos go as if touching him had become unpleasant. The deputy clamped irons on Reed's wrists before pride could find him another mistake. Porter, pale now, mounted hurriedly and began explaining he had been misled, professionally compromised, deeply regretful, and eager to depart. Tom suggested he begin with departing. When the riders finally disappeared into the dark with Amos cursing all the way, the yard emptied of tension by degrees. Jesse laughed first, sharp and unbelieving. Ben joined him, then Tom slapped the gatepost. Miss Hart just hanged a man with stationery. Even Caleb's mouth nearly surrendered to a smile. The men drifted back toward the bunkhouse and barn, retelling what they had just seen as if it had happened years ago. Stories start before events finish in places like that. Soon, only Eleanor and Caleb remained in the yard. The lantern between them hissed softly. Snow began again, small dry flakes turning in the light. You disobey often, he said. You choose poor moments to notice. He stepped closer. Bruising already darkened along his jaw where Amos had landed the glancing blow. You should have stayed on the porch. You should have let me read the paper sooner. A pause. Then, quieter. I was afraid he'd touch you. The plainness of it undid her more than eloquence could have. She lifted a hand to his jaw before thinking better of it. This time, she did not stop halfway. He went still under her touch. You are hurt. It's nothing. You lie poorly. I don't practice. Her thumb brushed the forming bruise. His eyes closed for one brief second, not from pain. When they opened again, something had changed in them, less guarded, more dangerous. Eleanor, he said, and her name in his voice had become a place. She waited. He seemed to search for words and dislike all of them. Then he chose action instead. He bent and kissed her. No flourish, no practiced seduction. A rough, careful claiming, born of restraint, stretched too tight. Cold air on her cheeks, warmth at her mouth, the taste of winter and coffee and the man himself. She caught his coat front to steady the world. When he drew back, both of them breathed as if they had outrun the weather. The porch light behind them cast long shadows across the snow. He touched his forehead lightly to hers. I meant to do that in the barn. You were interrupted. I've noticed. She laughed softly, the sound swallowed by night. Inside the house, the kitchen still held banked heat. He removed her coat without asking. She hung his beside it, small domestic motions, intimate in their own right. Neither moved farther. The stove ticked. Wind pressed once at the windows and passed on. At last she said, What did he mean? About shelter. Caleb's face closed slightly. He meant to wound. Was he wrong to think it possible? He looked at the floorboards, then back to her. I don't know what I offer beyond work and walls. There it was again, that wound, older than her arrival. The belief that tenderness belonged to other men. She crossed the room and took his hand, large, scarred, rough from rope and weather. You offer steadiness when it matters. You notice what is needed. You protect without making a theater of it. You carry too much and complain too little. And when frightened, you become bossy. His fingers tightened around hers. That last one may ruin me. It will require management. He drew her closer by their joined hands. "I've never been managed well. You've never hired the proper woman." The smile came then, real this time, brief, transforming, almost startling on him. She stared. "What? You should do that more often." He sobered slowly. "I don't know what comes next," he said. Neither did she. The kiss had not solved mortgages, reputations, or the fact that she was still an employee in his house and not yet anything else. But uncertainty felt different now, less like emptiness, more like road. "We begin with sleep," she said, "then coffee, then your bruised pride." "My pride's lower down." She swatted his arm. He caught her wrist gently and kissed her knuckles. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender she could not speak for a moment. He released her at once, as if unsure he had the right. She answered by rising on her toes and kissing him again. When they parted, he rested his hand at the small of her back, only long enough to walk her to the hallway. At her door, he stopped. The doorway pause. Something true waiting there. "I won't ask you to stay because I want it done right," he said. She understood the weight of those words. No half arrangements, no taking what comfort offered before daylight complicated it. So she touched his cheek once and opened her door. "Then do it right, Mr. Mercer." She closed it softly between them and leaned against the wood, heart unsteady and smiling into the dark. Morning came slow and pale, the kind that carried quiet instead of promise. Frost clung to the window glass in thin white veins, and the house held its breath between night and day. Eleanor rose before the others, not from habit this time, but from the need to steady herself in the hours before anything could be decided for her. She found Caleb already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, coffee set to boil. He did not look surprised to see her. He rarely did. But something in the way he stood, still, deliberate, as if holding ground, told her this morning was not like the others. "I was about to come find you," he said. "I imagined you would," she answered. The air between them felt different now, not strained, not uncertain, simply waiting. He poured coffee into 2 cups and set one before her without asking how she took it. He knew. That, more than anything, unsettled her. "I went over the numbers again last night," he said. "With what we secured in town, what we saved from the herd, and what you stopped from being stolen, this place stands." "It was always standing," she said quietly. "It only needed to be seen clearly." His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "I've been doing things alone for a long time," he said. "Got used to it. Thought it was the only way anything held together." "And now?" she asked. He met her eyes then, fully, without the usual distance. "Now I know that was pride dressed up as a necessity." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting the heat settle into her fingers. "And what do you intend to do about it?" He did not answer right away. Instead, he crossed the space between them, each step measured, as if this required more courage than facing storms or thieves. When he spoke, it was plain, as it always was with him. "Stay," he said, "not as hired help. Not because you've nowhere else to go. Stay because this is yours as much as mine now." The words landed steady, no flourish, no uncertainty. She studied him for a long moment, the man who had walked her through the rain without asking questions. The man who fixed what was broken instead of speaking about it. The man who had learned, slowly and stubbornly, to let someone stand beside him. "You are not offering shelter," she said. "No, nor obligation." "No." She set the cup aside. "Then what are you offering, Mr. Mercer?" He drew a breath, as if even this cost him something real. "A life," he said. "Built honest, shared, if you'll have it." Silence held for a moment, not empty, full. Then she stepped closer. "I came west for an arrangement," she said. "What I found was work, respect, and a man who does not know how to ask for anything gently." "That true?" he said. She allowed herself the smallest smile. "Fortunately, I do not require gentleness to understand sincerity." His hand found hers, rough and certain. "So," he said, voice lower now, "is that a yes?" She did not hesitate. "Yes." The word settled between them like something earned. Outside, the sun broke over the ridge, pale light stretching across snow and fence and open land. The ranch looked the same as it had the day she arrived, weathered, stubborn, unyielding, But it was not the same place. Not anymore. Caleb's grip tightened slightly, as if confirming she was real and would remain so. Eleanor, he said, and her name had lost its weight of distance. It belonged now. She stepped into him, steady as breath. "Let's begin properly," she said. And this time, when he kissed her, there was no interruption, no hesitation, no storm waiting at the door.